In today's video we go over the lore for the Mamluks, mercenaries within the Trench Crusade, and fill in gaps and then go over some of their real world history, how they recruited, how they fought. So welcome back to the trenches and let's begin. Mamluks are an echo of a bygone age, last members of the warrior elite that once ruled a great empire in northern Africa. They suffered grievous losses at the earliest stages of the Great War, when the legions of the demon Zelambur emerged from the Hellgate. The Fatimids led their Mamluk forces in a desperate campaign to reclaim the Levant, but of their fate there is no tale. Instead of returning victorious warriors, the slaves of Jahannam rushed through Sinai like an evil wind, razed Alexandria and Cairo to the ground. The remaining Mamluks fought bitterly to protect their homes, but to no avail. Too proud to leave their ancestral home at the mercy of evil, some of the last Mamluks did not heed the call to migrate beyond the Iron Wall, and instead dispersed throughout the lands they once ruled to fight on, a fight that never ceased since those dark days. To this day, the Mamluk knights play a deadly game of ambush and sudden raids on the Egyptian front against Mammon's legions, making their living swords for hire, waging an endless war against the heretics, and composing poems of lamentation in memory of their lost and devastated homelands. Generations of war have hardened the Mamluks into peerless warriors, for parents pass on the secrets of Furusiyah, the martial skills and ethical conduct of the Arabian Nights, to their children. Too few in number to wage open war, the Mamluks instead fight alongside any of the peoples of the book, making their living by offering their swords to the highest bidder, as long as such a leader promises to fight the forces of Shaitan. They respect noble character and martial prowess above all, and often bond by sharing their way of the sword with an ally they respect. Only a few of the famed artificial heavy war horses of the Mamluks remain, and they are not risked in open combat unless they are used directly to defend the last few hidden abodes the Mamluks still inhabit in the vast deserts that stretch beyond the Nile Delta. However, these tireless steeds are used to take the heavy Mamluk warriors into advanced positions where they can disrupt the enemy's plans and surprise exposed enemy units. It's mentioned they suffered great losses to the demon Zelambur. This demon, it's said, is one of the 5 sons of the Morning Star. He overlooks fraudulent business transactions. Each of his brothers oversees another area that they try to encourage in humans so that they misbehave. The Furusiyah mentioned was a type of knightly discipline and ethical code. It's mentioned they use artificial war horses, so it might be within the power of the forces of the church to create artificial beings, which I wasn't familiar with until I read that. I'm more familiar with this being within the abilities of the court of the 7-headed serpent. So outside that little bit of lore, we don't know much else, so I'm drawing on a military history book about them titled Mamluk Askari, 1250 to 1517. They are often described as slave soldiers, but it wasn't about a master's ownership of another, but one of patronage and obligations going both ways. The book tells us this ethical concept enabled slaves to have legal rights, almost as if they had been adopted as foster sons by a master, who accepted legal obligations as their foster father. The loyalty of the Mamluks was almost democratic, being based upon respect, obligation, fellow feeling and rewards. The elite of the elite were the Kasakia, the trained and freed Mamluks of the ruling sultan. They served in Cairo's citadel as ceremonial guards, junior military secretaries and pages, whilst receiving further training and making the contacts essential for senior promotion. Feasts were assigned to those of senior ranks, and each would then maintain a certain number of soldiers, and each of them would owe military service to the sultan. This senior soldier would also pay the troop expenses from his fief's earnings. The men would then buy what they need from the soldiers' market. The trench Mamluks appear to have artificial horses, which when they were introduced would have changed things. You might still need a place to stable them, but no food, no stable boy or girl to look after them, so you might save in those areas. The Osprey book tells us, despite their occasionally unorthodox habits, especially a widespread consumption of alcohol. Many of those Mamluks whose careers brought them wealth and influence demonstrated their piety by sponsoring religious buildings and institutions whose domes and minarets still dominate the skyline of several Middle Eastern cities. They faced the Mongols in many conflicts, and we have the Golden Khanate shown on the recent map, so some of this might still hold. Interestingly, like the Crusaders, many Mamluks believe in help from good spirits or angels, as well as the negative effects of evil spirits or demons. Visions and divine signs were important, as were the use of spells, talismans, and written charms against demons or evil jinn, and the command of jinn via the Ring of Solomon is mentioned in a recent law drop on Facebook. It was under the Alamet one, I believe. So back to the Mamluks. They were trained broadly and were not confined to cavalry skills, and included the use of all weapons, both on horseback and on foot, knowledge of armour, siege warfare, hunting, and eventually naval warfare, which would be an interesting way to bring them into the Trench Crusade. More specifically, fighting with spear had 4 parts from the book. First, training in handling the weapon, types of charge and thrust, and spear combat, when not actually charging, then exercises consisting of set movements for a single horseman, followed by manoeuvring his horse and parrying an opponent's thrust, then mock combats between 2 men. At least one of them was armed with a spear, and lastly, Mayadin simulated combat between 2 teams of horsemen. One of the strengths of the Mamluks is the archery. There are several real-world records kept of training. One says they would shoot at close range at wicker baskets filled with sand. Now, to get more on it, to quote directly, archery training at a high target was intended to improve a shooter's dexterity, while shooting to the rear was more of a party trick. Long range or flight shooting was another exercise that developed strength and skill. In contrast, shower shooting was a real military skill that focused upon grouping several arrows within a limited target area. It required constant practice for the archer to become fast and accurate. So there was a special maiden or open training area in Cairo for such flight shooting. Another focused on how to escape a lasso when facing Turks or Mongols. One says soldiers should be able to swim to help cope with a river crossing. And when facing Crusaders, cavalry chargers, tactics formed on how to avoid them. Their greater mobility, superior discipline, and probably more advanced battlefield communications enabled the Mamluks to envelop the enemy, surround them, attacking from the flanks and the rear. And then mobility even lets them get out of range of crossbowmen when they are seen. They're not just horsemen, but as most soldiers, broader tactician skills are within their skill set as well. Just an example, an ambush. The chosen site will be near a source of water. If the operation happens to be delayed, they will need it. The site needs to be well selected to avoid being ambushed themselves. They should be silent and quiet to not attract attention or startle the wildlife. During a skirmish, if one horse is lame, another rider must seat that person behind them so that none are left behind. Any ambush must be divided into 3 parts. To quote, one of them should go to a position not farther than 2,000 paces from one side of the 2 flanks of the vanguard forces, being in a position close to the open flank of the enemy, as close as the unbelievers' battle line will allow. If the force should become enfeebled, the ambush party at the rear will be there for reinforcement for them. So that's the basic law on the Mamluks, along with quite a lot of me putting in some real-world military history, just to give you a sense of who they are, what they're capable of. Maybe if we get a larger game rather than the skirmishes, some of this will be interesting for you to listen to and to educate you about the Mamluks. Plus, I like some history, so if I can throw it in there, I'm going to go for it. Anyway, let's get the outro out of the way. If you like this video on the Trench Crusade, well, why not try this one? And if you want a whole bunch of videos on the Trench Crusade, there's a playlist on my channel. And there's also a 40k playlist as well, if that's in your area of interest.